note that all members are present except for Commissioner Marubayashi, who I think is showing up later, so just note that. But we do have quorum. So with that, I will move to the first item, which is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so the motion carries, the agenda is approved. And now we'll go to brief announcements from staff, commissioners, and city council liaisons. Any announcements?
I do not have any announcements, but just Happy New Year to everyone. It's good to see you all.
Any announcements?
I have three. The first one is that we, at the beginning of each calendar year, we change mayor and vice mayor. So Mayor Neville, who's also your council liaison, started her term beginning of January and will be the mayor for the rest of this calendar year. The vice mayor is Gloria Partida, and she will be the vice mayor for the calendar year as well. So that's number one. Number two is just an update on our audit situation. That was something that at the last meeting in November, I believe Commissioner Harper had asked about, and we said we would provide an update at every meeting. So we have made good progress on FY23. The auditors have just about all of the information from the general ledger. We're still in some back and forth on one of the new GASB pronouncements that has to do with software licensing. It's one that's new for FY23, and so anytime there's a new requirement, it usually takes a little bit of back and forth to get all the right information together. But we've been working on that, and I want to say we're very close to having all of that information to them, to the auditors. They often will come back with additional questions for clarification or more information that they need. So that's the back and forth that we're having with them at the moment on that particular piece. We have a meeting scheduled with them next week. We have our regular check-ins that we have weekly or every other week, just sort of depends on their schedules. And we're looking to hopefully complete the FY23 ACFR financials by early February. So hopefully by the next meeting, I'll be able to give you a very specific, either it's coming out on this date or a very specific update. The single audit, which is the audit that is for federal funds over a certain amount, it will take about a month more once we've finished the FY23 numbers. We have to have those numbers all audited and stopped in order to complete the single audit portion. So this follows the schedule that we had brought to council last June as part of the budget discussion. And at the same time that we've been working to complete 23, as I mentioned back in November, we're trying to be as set up as possible and working on the pieces of 24 and 25 so that those can stay on the schedule that we set up, which should, knock on wood, have everything completed and caught up by about August of this year now. That will lead us, of course, right into doing 26, which will have been closed as of shortly after July, which is our fiscal new year. So that news is all positive in that we are staying on the schedule we put forward, and our staff has done a fantastic job really focusing on it. Kieran, our finance manager, who's not here this evening, has been really leading that effort, and I'm pretty sure she is dreaming about audits, maybe nightmares, but dreaming about audits and looking forward to the day when she can also do other things other than just be focusing on the catch-up. So that was the second announcement. The third one is that by our next meeting, it is quite possible that we will have a new finance director on board. We have completed our recruitment and are working through that, and hopefully we'll have something good to announce in the next week or so. So that is, I have a big smile on my face for that, because I'm sure Alexis does as well. So those are my three announcements.
Thank you. And I apologize. To go back to the approval of the agenda, I don't think I ever called for a vote. Sorry, it's been a while since we've been back on this. So going back to that item, we had a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Cool. Motion carries. Thank you. Now going back to item 3, do any commissioners have any announcements? Okay. Then we can move on to item 4, public comments. So anytime any member of the public may come up for public comment, if there's any. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5, the consent items. If there's no discussion on this, is there a motion to approve consent items? I know the minutes we got today, so I'm not sure if everyone had a chance to review and was comfortable with moving forward with those.
Move to approve the minutes.
A second?
I'll second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Yes.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? No. That, we approve all the items of the consent. So that moves to item 6, right, the regular items. We have a presentation from Michael Coleman, who we're so lucky to have back. Thank you so much.
I could just do a really quick introduction for some of you who have been on the commission for a little while. He's a familiar face. For those of you who are new, you might not have seen him before. But this is Michael Coleman. We are very fortunate that he is a Davis resident, but he is known throughout the state as the municipal California finance expert. He worked for a number of years as an advisor to the California League of Cities, and he maintains a website, californiacityfinance.com, which has every type of information you would ever want to know about California municipal finance. He was here with this commission. He was very gracious enough to share his time and thoughts with us last October 2024, and he gave a very broad overview. Tonight he's going to be giving a bit of an overview, but then also honing in on some municipal revenue kinds of issues. You may have other questions for him. I don't want to put him on the spot, but I haven't seen a question yet that he can't answer about municipal finance. So if you have other questions or things that have come to mind, you can ask those when he's completed with his presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Great. Good evening. It's great to meet you and be here this evening. We're going to get into a little bit of an overview to start with. And some of this will be very much a refresher for many of you. And I know many of you have really excellent backgrounds in this kind of stuff already. So it'll certainly be a refresher. But I always find that there are little things that come up, little light bulbs that go off, even when I go through these things and do these presentations. And I've done these many times. So one of the first things I like to start with when I talk about municipal finance with any group is that when we talk about looking at cities and counties and special districts, those are actually obviously different types of local governments. But even if we took and looked at all the different cities in California, there's a lot of diversity. And obviously that has to do with the different types of geography and where folks are located, types and types of community character, whether they're bedroom or industrial or mixed use in character, whether they're located near the capital and have a different kind of job mix than others, university towns, obviously, size, urban, rural, governance responsibilities is really a big thing. Some cities are responsible for whatever, we call full service cities. Well, what is a full service city? I'm really talking about cities that are looking at the general fund responsible for police, fire, parks and recreation, libraries, the full spectrum of services. Davis being almost a full service city, excepting the library piece, which is a relatively small piece. But when you look at comparing different cities that are not full service, that have a special district, for example, doing the fire services, have a different structure of their finances. You don't even see money coming in or going out for fire services in their budgets, and therefore you see different sorts of levels of revenue, different levels of property tax, for example, because a big hunk of the property tax may be going to the special district rather than to the city. And so you just need to keep these things in mind when we look at comparing these different types of organizations or when forming public policy on a statewide level, for example, because different types of municipalities are affected in different ways. We find this all the time. So it makes it very difficult sometimes and challenging to look at public policies and changes that serve everyone, that don't run into opposition from some few folks. And we can talk about some examples this evening. But it's also sort of necessary to start someplace with what is the typical, and then sort of drill down and say, well, this is how this community is different, or let's look at more similar kinds of cities as we try to do comparisons and evaluations. I also like to sort of start off when we talk about government revenues, of thinking about what makes different government revenues different. And for this, I kind of go back to biology class, oddly enough. We all had a biology class at some time in high school or perhaps in college. And there was a section in biology that they called taxonomy, which actually had nothing to do with taxes or finances at all. But you remember taxonomy had to do with sort of breaking up the animal kingdom into different categories based on different characteristics, numbers of legs and exoskeletons and things like this. And so we might think about government revenues, taxonomy of government revenues perhaps, in some sort of similar way. And the first thing that might make government revenues different from others is who must pay that particular government charge. And by this, I'm not talking about the economic aspect of who bears the incidence of the tariff or the tax, big debates, right? Who's really paying tariffs? Who's really paying the gas tax that gets imposed? Here I'm talking about who is legally responsible for paying it, not collecting it, because, for example, in the case of hotels and transient occupancy tax or hotel occupancy tax, hotels collect that tax. But the hotel occupant is actually the one who legally is responsible for paying it, not the hotel company itself. That would be a business operations tax. The hotel occupant. The tax is legally on the hotel occupant. Why does it matter if we say whether that 5% of the hotel room rate is a tax on the hotel occupant or a tax on the hotel itself as a business tax? Legally speaking, it makes a big difference, and functionally, it makes a big difference. For example, when we get into online booking of things, that can create great complications for how the tax is charged and creates great legal disputes, as has been the case. So who pays is a big thing. What is the rate and what is the base? Is this a percentage of the value? In that case, how do we determine what the value is with the last time it was sold? Is there a depreciation schedule? Do we have to go out every year and determine what the value of the property is? Imagine if we were still doing that with real estate, how much burden there would be on assessors that already have to keep dramatic records. Well, no longer do they have to do that. They just look at the saleable price of real estate when it is transacted. And then, of course, Prop 13 provides restrictions on determinations of how to determine the assessed valuation as long as it remains in the same hands going forward. So what's the rate? What's the base? Those are two important factors. For example, the rate that we charge on gas tax, gasoline tax, is a per gallon excise tax. It's per gallon. It doesn't matter if the price of gasoline goes up or down for that gas tax collection. It's going to be the same price depending on how many gallons are sold. So if you're looking at revenue projections, the important thing is looking at consumption, the volume of consumption. It doesn't really matter what the price is. That can affect things in the economic sense, of course, in terms of purchasing price and everything, as opposed to a sales tax, which is based on the value, obviously, of the sold property, sold item. So that's an important difference among different types of charges. Who collects and who enforces it? Hopefully, whoever collects and enforces the collection of a particular revenue source gets some part of it. Because then they have a self-interest in making sure that it's done properly. So counties are fully responsible in California for collecting and apportioning the property tax, and they get a big piece of it. It's very important to them, right? Sales tax, the state of California gets a big piece of the sales tax, so the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration that administers that, they have a self-interest in making sure they do a really good job of that, and they generally do. And then how's it allocated? Is this allocated on a population basis? Is it something that a particular municipality charges and it just goes entirely to that municipality, say to the general fund or a particular fund for what it's charged for? Or is it allocated on some more complicated formula? If you look at our transportation fueling system, our local streets and roads revenues that come into this city as well as many others, and gas tax funds, the formulas that determine what this city and every other city in California is going to get are extremely complicated. are largely affected by population growth and the growth in total statewide gasoline tax revenues overall, and what our population growth is here in this city relative to others. But there are various other complicated takeouts and special allocations and those kind of things that can affect the entire aspect of the allocation. So that's another thing. And then what is it used for? Is this something that can be used for general purposes, like our general purpose sales tax, like the transactions and use tax, additional sales taxes that we've imposed in this city? Or is it restricted for specific purposes, like the park tax we have, or those kinds of things? And those must go into a special fund, and we must show that we're spending those things only for those purposes that are legally provided. So all of the rules on these kind of things are, of course, found in the law. And I always tell my students, take one law class, find a good professor, it doesn't matter what you take it in copyright law, take it in something, just so you have a sense of what the law is about. Because the law is where the rules are for all these kinds of things. And there's a hierarchy of laws, from the state constitution through the state law or statutes, down to what the local voters are imposing, how the courts are determining these kinds of things, and of course, the rules and laws that are imposed by the municipality itself, ordinances, or city laws, basically, and resolutions that go ahead and implement those laws as well. So that's the basic structure of kind of starting to think about these different types of charges, and then we think about what is a tax. Now, the idea of a tax has been around since, sort of came out of the post-feudal time, when it wasn't just riding around the country, the knights of the realm, and extracting things from people, but there was a system of taxation that had some documentation, that there was a logic to it, that everybody paid. And so this is something that is historic throughout the world, the idea of a tax. But in California, we have specific rules and specific definitions of what exactly is a tax. In California, then this goes, generally the idea of taxes follows somewhat consistent with the overall view of things, but a tax is a charge which pays for public services and facilities that provide general benefits. That is, benefits to anybody in the community, regardless of whether they paid or not. There doesn't have to be a direct relationship between what you pay into a system in taxes and what you get back in services. So it makes sense that the things that we finance with taxes, for example, in this community, are things that we want everybody to have access to or to take advantage of and use when they need it, regardless of ability to pay. It doesn't make sense to be charging or financing our fire department from fees alone. I mean, it makes sense for fire inspection fees, perhaps, because those, if you need to get a fire permit, maybe that makes sense that you pay for that permit and cover the cost of that yourself. But it makes sense that we not have to bear the full burden of calling out the fire engine every time we need them to come, or people wouldn't call the fire department. We want them to call and get the use of that services when they need it, regardless of ability to pay. And it doesn't make sense to be charging some of these kinds of things on a fee basis. How would you allocate out fee charges and relative to benefits of a parking enforcement officer who's sitting in an intersection, taking everybody's speed and calming the traffic there? There's a general benefit to that. And the idea here is that, as opposed to charges or fees on individuals that are triggered perhaps by their own specific use and benefit of a service, we finance services from taxes that are more communally based. And in some cases, we have services that are a mix of finance from a mix of fees and taxes. For example, parks and recreation classes. We want people to take advantage of those. And so to the extent that we have a policy or that we set our fees to only cover a portion of that portion that's covered from taxes is, in a sense, our policy statement of this is a measure of the general benefit that we think is present from encouraging people, from subsidizing the service so more people can have access to it, and there can be a lower barrier than just saying, we're going to have the private sector provide all the pools in town. And then you wouldn't have as much activity in the pools. Cities in California can impose any kind of tax that's not otherwise prohibited by law. That sounds pretty wide open, but the landscape of what can and can't be charged has been pretty well divided up. And the state has reserved a number of taxes over the years for its own purposes, so cities, counties, and special districts don't have access to charge these particular kinds of taxes. So we can't charge cigarette taxes, we can't charge alcohol taxes. You could do a different business operations tax on liquor stores, and that's based on their gross receipts, but you can't charge alcohol taxes in the same, alcohol excise tax in the way that the state does. We can't charge personal income taxes either, the way the state does as well. We in local government rely on property taxes primarily and on a mix of sales taxes and other kinds of things, as we'll see. The other rule about taxes is that in California, in our Constitution, we have provisions that define the difference between a general tax and a special tax. And this comes out of a series of statewide initiatives, starting with Proposition 13, some court decisions which helped to define what the words in Prop 13 meant, because they weren't well defined in Prop 13 itself, so it took years to figure out what is a special tax that's talked about in Prop 13. The courts helped us with that. And then this was all codified again in Proposition 218 in 1996, which says a general tax requires majority voter approval, that is to increase, expand to a new class of user. Let's say we had telephones that plugged into the wall, and our telephone tax was, defined a telephone as something that plugs into the wall. And now we have wireless, so we need to expand to that new class of user that is covered by that. Let's say as an example. So expansion or an extension, let's say beyond the sunset date, any of those kinds of actions require majority voter approval. But if you earmark the tax in the law or you restrict it for a specific purpose, then it's referred to as a special tax, and that requires 2/3 voter approval to increase, extend, or expand. Parcel taxes are de facto defined as special taxes, regardless of how you define the use of those, whether they're special, specific uses or for lots of different projects that the city may do. For some reason, the writers of this Proposition 218 and Prop 13 define parcel tax kind of specially. And that's primarily because probably those writers were most concerned about the rights of property owners in that. So a little trivia there. In that state constitution, and this really comes out finally as a result of many court decisions, but further defined in Proposition 26 of 2010, the structure laid out in the Constitution is that any charge, levy, or exaction by a government is a tax. It's all a tax, unless it falls into one of the enumerated categories. And the first one might be it is a charge for a privilege or benefit or service or product. And so I call these user fees or assessments being charges on property for benefits to property, which have their own body of rules and restrictions laid out in Article 13D. But water fees, sewer fees, development fees, there are certain kinds of property-related fees that have specific rules for approval and those kind of things. But these are called out specifically, charge for a service, a benefit, or a product. And one of the aspects of these, hold on for a minute. Then in the second category is regulatory fees. And this would be a charge for a regulatory activity provided to the applicant. So a building inspection fee for a building permit, health inspection fee, these kind of things, regulatory activities. And the key thing about these two categories is that the revenues that are collected from these fees may not exceed the reasonable cost of providing those services. I say reasonable cost, reasonable estimate. You don't have to do, it does not say actual cost, so you don't have to figure out exactly what it cost, that particular permit. This is language that would have been put in by the California Business Roundtable measure that was pulled off the ballot by the Supreme Court last year, fortunately, because it would have been a nightmare to figure out how to deal with actual costs and fees. But a reasonable estimate of the fees. And if you see that you're collecting more revenues than it actually costs to provide the services, and that can include reasonable overhead as well, allocated overhead, then you're complying with the law as long as you don't exceed that. But you can't provide free services to someone. Let's say we provide Mrs. McGillicuddy next door because she's on a fixed income and she's a senior with a subsidy for her building inspection permit. You can't load the costs, that the subsidy costs, onto other building permit payers. If you're going to provide that subsidy, and you could do this in, let's say, water fees or for fixed, any kind of, grant like that. Oftentimes these are done and they're tied to the PG&E subsidized rates. But you're gonna fund that to make sure you cover your services, the money you're not collecting from fees, by some sort of tax or interest earning, something that's not fees on others. You can't be charging the fee costs of somebody you're giving a break to onto the other fee payers. And the logic of that, I don't know if the writers were thinking about it this way, but the way I think about it is, essentially, if we're providing that break to veterans or seniors or whomever we're providing that lifeline rate to, we're saying there's a public benefit to do that. There's a general benefit to do that. Oh, that goes back to the logic of what a tax is. And that's where we provide that service from. The other category that's called out in the Constitution is a charge for the entrance, use, or rental of government property. So if someone were to rent a community center or a pool, or to have an entrance fee to a museum, I would call that a rent. Maybe you can call that a fee, but it falls into this kind of a category, use of government property, a toll. And this is called out separately in the Constitution, and note that it doesn't have that little red asterisk that I put in here. Constitution doesn't have that red asterisks, but in my chart here, it doesn't have to be cost justified like the first two categories do. So for renting your hall here for community center kinds of things, you can look at what the optimists are charging or the odd fellows are charging for their hall and kind of look at what's a reasonable kind of cost, but you're not restricted only to costs for services in the revenues that you collect for that or the fees that you charge. Penalties for illegal activity, late payments, those kinds of things are not taxes. And then anything that's a payment that's not imposed by local government, what that might that be? And this comes out of the phrase right at the top there, any charge or exaction of any kind imposed. So what about something that's not imposed? This is sort of the subject of imagination by attorneys now. What is exactly might not be imposed, but things that could fall into this might be a development agreement. Some kind of a donations, obviously, but a contribution or a payment to the city that's done by a mutual agreement is perhaps not imposed by local government, and so therefore not a tax. Now, why is it important to determine what's a tax and not? Is because there are voter approval requirements and procedural requirements for getting these things approved. I already mentioned that majority voter approval for general taxes and for special taxes. General obligation bonds, which is the one way that a city or a county or a special district or a school might be able to increase the 1% property tax rate above the 1%, requires 2/3 voter approval for cities and counties. If it's legitimately this charge is a fee, fine, or a rent, one of those other accepted categories, those can generally be adopted by majority vote of the governing board. Again, special procedures for things called property-related fees, which I think some of you are familiar with, water and sewer and those sorts of things. Special districts and school districts, because they're specific purpose agencies, do not have the ability to charge a general purpose tax. So they're restricted to 2/3 voter approval taxes. That's why you see school districts, if they're going to seek additional revenue, it's generally the parcel tax they're looking at. And relatively few cities have done, school districts have done that. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of school districts, so there's many that have. But Davis is not that common among school districts that have gone out to the voters and managed to get a parcel tax approved. So we're fortunate in that standpoint to have that additional source of revenue. School districts also, as you know, can get 55% voter approval will get them a general obligation bond passed as well. And then the state has its own rules. The state does not have to go to the vote of the people to get a tax passed. They can, and it has been done before. Jerry Brown wanted to put something on the ballot to make sure the voters were approving of a tax. That can be done, but the legislature itself can adopt a tax increase with 2/3 voter approval of each house of the legislature and the approval of the governor. So then let's look at the mashup of all city revenues in the state. Our situation differs here a little bit, and it's going to differ in each city. In this donut, you'll see that utility user fees, the purple stuff, takes up quite a bit a budget. And these are going to be enterprise funds, water funds, sewer, utility, and those kind of things. You have federal and state grants there, the teal colors that are generally earmarked for specific purposes. The left side of this donut is stuff that's all restricted for specific purposes. Virtually all of the money that comes from the state or federal government is for specific purposes. There's very limited exceptions to that. And so if we look at just that right side of this donut here, of the property taxes and the sales tax, all that green stuff kind of going there, and we kind of look over at a chart just for, these are just the discretionary revenues then, in sort of a typical full-service city. This is what your city council faces each year when it's looking at adopting the budget. It's balancing these two bars here. And you can imagine if Davis was a city where the fire department was, fire services provided by a special district and not the city, then you can just lump off the fire part on the expenditure side, and the property tax is going to be that much lower likely. Generally, that's the logic of it. There would be a big hunk of the property tax going over to the fire district. And so that kind of explains why some cities, is the biggest reason why some cities get lower shares of property tax revenues than other cities. There are many other reasons as well, and some of it is not logical. It's just the way things were, sort of. But this is where the sort of rubber meets the road in the budget each year. And you can kind of imagine as you look at this expenditure side here, when a city is experiencing real fiscal stress and having to cut back things, and public safety is pretty uniformly the #1 priority, the big reductions in hits are going to be coming in areas of parks and recreation and library and even street maintenance and those kind of things. This is just, in this chart, the street maintenance money that's coming from the general fund. It supplements the amount of money that comes into the special gas tax from the state. So let's take a brief look at property tax. Ad valorem, that's fancy Latin for value-based tax imposed on real property. You know these things. 1% rate. It's the only tax rate that's fixed in the state constitution. Interestingly enough, even the voters can't go above the 1% rate except to approve rates to fund general obligation bond debt. The assessed valuations back in 1978 were rolled back a few years to the 1975-76 levels. And then once a property sells, of course, then it's reassessed to full value based on the change of ownership, and then can increase at consumer price index, which is a measure of inflation, or 2% per year, whichever is less. And in some years, we've actually had inflation at below 2%, nearly 0% in some years, which means that even if my property assessed valuation is growing, if inflation is actually declining or down below 2%, then I'm going to get a tax break next year, not up to the full 2% rate. And one of the aspects of that is that there's no recapture. Once you, the following year is then going to be based on the growth rate from that past year. So once statewide we go below that 2%, there's no recapture. There is kind of a recapture in this situation where if a property declines in value below, the market value actually declines in value below the assessed valuation for taxes, then this is called a Proposition 8 reduction. It used to be before great computers were online that assessors would basically go out and make these reassessments, downward assessments for properties on request. But now we have computers and assessors, many of them are elected, right? So they go out and without being asked, will look and see if market values have declined below for any properties below taxable. It's been happening, for example, in commercial properties in some areas with the pandemic and work from home kind of thing. San Francisco's experienced some real difficulties in that area. So what happens there is the property that is assessed for tax purposes at the market rate, if it's below this assessed valuation bench rate plus 2%, but can increase in following years as the market rate goes up until it hits that maximum level of resale plus 2% or CPI from there on. Okay. So, and then the allocation of property taxes, of course, is among cities, counties, special districts, and schools. And I always ask my students, so what public agency do you not see in this donut? big public agency. There's no state of California. State of California does not get a piece of the property tax revenues. That's a common misperception of folks. Property taxes have a big effect on the state budget because that's one of the two major sources of funding for schools. And if property tax revenues go down, the state, based on its minimum guarantees, has to increase its contributions from the state general fund. So it shows up on the expenditure side in the state general fund, but they don't receive property tax revenues. In fact, property tax revenues stay within counties. They're collected and allocated out to agencies within each county. They don't cross county lines. They can't. So if we were looking at want to do some kind of reallocation among cities of property tax revenues, let's say we have some better fairness idea, well, you can't, under the Constitution currently, send money from Davis to Dixon or vice versa if we thought that would be more fair. Can't cross county lines. They stay within, collected within each county and allocated back out among the agencies within each county. Sales taxes is the other big one, of course. And in California, we have, let's see, okay. We have the state portion of sales tax is 6%, most of which goes into the state general fund, but some of which goes into special revenue funds and is being directly back out to counties for realignment and public safety purposes that the state has delegated, services that the state has delegated to counties to carry out. The thing that we're concerned about most as a city is that 1% city rate, so-called Bradley-Burns rate. And that is based on, it's a situs-based rate. It's based on where the transaction occurs. In addition to that rate, and this 1% together with a 6% rate from the state composes the base 7.25% minimum rate that's every place in the state has. But cities and counties can also adopt additional, with voter approval, because it's tax, right? Additional rates called transactions and use tax rates. And you're probably all familiar that this is not exactly the same as a sales tax rate. It's charged along with the sales tax, and any consumer thinks it's just part of the sales tax. It's like an add-on sales tax, I often call it that. But the difference is it's actually allocated differently. The 2% transactions and use tax rate here in the city of Davis is paid by the fee payers, the recipients. So on transactions that I make within the city of Davis online, for example, to some retailer that's located elsewhere, the Bradley-Burns rate, if it's out of state, goes to that if it's in state, goes to the city where that retailer is located. But the transactions and use tax rates go to where I am, the purchaser. So it sounds very complicated, but let's spend a little time with that because this can get a little bit interesting, and I think it's very relevant for you thinking about the budget and how these two very important sources of revenue in your budget, the transaction and use tax rates and your sales tax, are actually quite different and behave differently over time. This goes back to the notion of what we call sourcing. The sourcing is essentially what we call, what's the term for the rules that determine where the purchase took place. It's one thing if I go down to the Ace Hardware here and buy a bucket of bolts here, I'm at the purchaser at the same place, the bucket of bolts and the retailer, we're all at the same location. We know the location of the transaction for the purpose of determining what the rate is and who gets it. But if I buy that bucket of bolts online from some retailer, I want to buy it from the Ace Hardware that's in Lodi, that Bradley-Burns rate is going to go to Lodi. Because, well, the question is, where does that transaction occur? Is it where the retailer is? Is it where the seller is? Is it where the product is? And this can be defined in different ways. And in fact, different states for different sales tax structures define it in different ways. Some states, all of the sales tax goes to where the purchaser is located, not where the retailer is. We do it this way in California because our sales tax began back in the 50s, long before computers, and we were trying to make it easier on the folks who were collecting this, which is the retailers. And if they had to figure out the different rate that applied to every single place they were sending product, then that would be just too complicated for them and onerous. So all we asked them to do when we set this up back in the 50s was to say, what's the rate that applies to where you're located? And so that was fine until we start getting into remote sales and it gets much more complicated. So we have the sales tax and what's called the use tax that is the companion to the sales tax. So even back in the 30s, when we first established a statewide sales tax, there was this issue even back then before computers where Tom, who's got to find a part for his tractor in the Fresno County farm, is purchasing parts from a retailer who's located in Nevada. And the retailer in Nevada says, I'm not located in California, I'm not compelled to collect their tax. So in that kind of case, then Tom is still responsible for making sure that tax gets paid as the user. So a use tax applies at the same rate. So this use tax applies where the sales tax has not been collected but legally should be. So even us as consumers, as online sales started to emerge in the 90s here, we're actually legally responsible to pay use tax on products that we were buying, and very few people did. I did because I was always talking about these kinds of things. But there's the schedule on your tax forms that, for you to fill out, even back then, what kinds of things did you purchase that you should have paid taxes on that you didn't, and so you could pay the use tax, or there was a standard amount that you could do. At any rate, there's sales tax and use tax, and then there's the transactions and use tax for those extra add-on rates. Now, for an over-the-counter sale, I say, the Bradley-Burns rate, the transactions and use tax rate apply to there's no question or no big debate, hard question about where the transaction occurred. They all go to the city where the retailer is located, where the product is purchased, or I'm walking up to the counter and taking control of the product. In the case of an auto dealership, it's a little bit different though, and this is relevant to us too. In the case of an auto dealership, if the dealership is located in the city of Davis, but I'm located actually in the city of Woodland, and I come over and purchase a car here in Davis, then the Bradley-Burns rate goes to the city of Davis, but any add-on transaction use tax that apply in Woodland go to where I'm registering the car. So that's been long-standing the tradition there, and that has meant that actually automobile dealerships that provide a lot of the sales tax revenue that comes to cities like Davis have not been so much in opposition to when you want to do an add-on sales tax, because it's going to apply to residents of all these other cities where they're located, and only citizens of Davis are going to be paying the taxes, these add-on sales and use taxes, not citizens or businesses located in other locations. So that's the Bradley-Burns sales tax and the transaction use tax when it comes to an automobile dealership sale. Now for a remote online sale, it's actually also kind of similar. The Bradley-Burns sales tax goes to where the sales is located. The transaction use tax goes to where the resident or the purchaser is. So this is important that we have computers now, because it means that all of these retailers that are doing online transactions have to determine where they're sending these products and have the computer program intact, which is perfectly available. It's not hard now, of what the taxes, what the add-on sales taxes are that apply where they're sending this good. There's a really important, really good description of some of the problems of this particular arrangement that we're experiencing now among cities and counties in California that I would commend to you. Just do a browser search on Bloomberg California tax deals. It's a 10-minute video that was done by Bloomberg Tax that looks at a couple of cities in the Central Valley, Reedley and Dinuba, one of whom has gotten big into the game of warehouse online transactions and is doing a lot of business and raking a lot of money for the city on that, and the other that's a very similar city that isn't. And sort of the problems that we have right now with this current system of allocation. It's pretty fascinating. This is a hot topic among cities because while it seems like something that ought to be reformed, whether you take a position on this as a city manager in favor or in opposition to it depends largely on whether your city is a winner or a loser in this transaction and how it might change if we came up with what might be argued to be a more equitable system. So there's been lots of discussion and some legislation that's been pursued on this in the past. But what happens if this online sale is with a retailer that is out of state? In this case, this whole issue with the Bloomberg tax deals and Dynamo and Readly isn't such a deal. Let's say we have a retailer that's located in Texas, or that guy in Nevada was sending the parts into the farmer in Fresno County. In this case, it's collected as use tax because the retailer is not going to pay it, not compelled to collect that revenue. In this case, let's say. Instead, it's going to go be collected and reported as use tax, and it's actually shared among all of the cities in the county. So this happens in Davis. If I make a purchase of an online good from a retailer that's located out of state, the Bradley Burns sales tax goes into what's called the countywide pool. It's just an accounting mechanism at the state CDTFA, and it's shared. So some of that transaction actually goes to Woodland and West Sacramento and the county of Yolo, even though they had nothing to do with the transaction. I'm in Davis, and I transacted with a company. But this was done, again, in order to make it easier on retailers that were reporting this, the use tax, to put it into the pool and make it easier to allocate out. There's not a lot of logic for this anymore, because we are allocating these transactions and use taxes. They're being collected now, and this largely comes out of a Supreme Court decision that was Justice Kennedy's last decision before he left the Supreme Court that had to do with South Dakota versus a Wayfair company, and taking on the issue of whether states could compel companies that are out of state to collect these taxes. And the Supreme Court reversed its prior position and said the world has changed now with all this digital activity. We can argue that even though this company doesn't have physical presence in California, if it's doing a reasonable amount of business in California, it has presence, it has digital presence, and therefore we can compel it to collect those taxes that are due from its business going on in California. So largely the revenues now from these online transactions are being collected, and the transactions and use taxes, the add-on sales taxes as well. This issue of lost sales tax because of online sales is not so much an issue anymore. All that stuff on Amazon and Best Buy, eBay and all those things is for the most part being collected. Now, CDTFA still has a job to do to make sure that folks are complying, but there's been a great change in the collection of these revenues since over time. So that's that on sales taxes. The other piece I wanted to spend a little time with you today is on the topic of the financial health and how we look at financial health. You know, many years ago, I've been doing this for several decades now, and so I was around when Vallejo started to hit the fan at the time, and then Stockton, and then San Bernardino, and there were cities that were having struggles, some not far from here, some smaller cities, really struggling with things that didn't really utter the bankruptcy word or start talking about that kind of legal proceeding of getting relief from the organization. It was like, we just ought to shut our doors and let the county do it all, because this isn't working out. So why does the question I was getting from many longtime folks was, well, I think I know what's going on in my city, but what question should I be asking? What are the two numbers in the annual financial report and the audit that I should be looking at that will tell me if my city is healthy or not? And some of you were smiling because you know there's no two numbers. There's no one number. It's not that simple, unfortunately. There are many different things that are indicators, and there are many different reasons why these kind of things come along. So I worked on developing a financial health diagnostic tool. I had great help, by the way, from Bob Leland, one of our illustrious local financial folks here in this town, former finance director from Fairfield, and a great guy, and has worked with this commission quite a bit. And one of the things not surprising that we find in cities that get into financial trouble is unsustainable employee compensation. This is a huge one. You want to be generous with your employees. We invest a lot in training up police officers and firefighters. We don't want to just train them up only to lose them next door because they're paying a slightly higher rate. And we want to pay them rates that allow them to be able to live in our communities. But if you're providing a compensation level that's not sustainable within where the trajectory of your city finances are going, you're not doing anyone any favors. The problems that every one of the common things you saw in Vallejo and Stockton and San Bernardino was overly generous compensation packages. You could vest for retiree health care in the city of Stockton if you worked there for 1 month. Something, obviously not anymore, because that's one of the things that changed in the bankruptcy. But unsustainable and intractable levels of employee compensation is a big one. And that includes retiree health care, and that's a challenge. The other one is ceding management and policy decisions away to others. And this goes back to my graduate school days over here at USC in Sacramento, where John Carlin used to talk about choice in local government as being an ideal, and I really believe in that. Healthy cities are those that have maximum policy choices. If your hands are tied in the budget because you've got multiple types of restricted revenues and maintenance of effort requirements that you've agreed to, and binding arbitration, these are common factors in cities that get into financial trouble because it ties the hands of the city council or the decision makers to be able to move when things start to get into trouble. And so you have really odd things like we can't touch the fire department because they have the special maintenance of effort and the special tax. It keeps their revenues the same, and that's a huge amount of budget that we have no ability to reduce, even if we could find some reasonable efficiencies there, or the library, or the parks department. If I'm the parks director, I love dedicated revenues. They mean I don't have to compete with the fire folks over budget, but it's not healthy for a city that's trying to balance its budget and look for efficiencies in those kinds of ways. So, ceding management policy choices, over-reliance on redevelopment agency revenues. It's an old story, but some folks got way too invested into that and got caught by it. Over-reliance on land development revenues. This happened in very much a case in Vallejo, where year after year they were approving new land use developments with the idea this will balance our budget. And this is not a statement pro or con about land use development in Davis. I'm a Davis resident, believe me. I am not opposed to new development in this community. What it is a statement about is relying on that in order to balance your budget. When you're essentially looking at, oh, there's going to be a net revenue from this new development that's going to balance our budget, in many cases that is a one-time slug. It's a one-time solution that's trying to solve an ongoing budgetary problem, and it's dangerous because as soon as there's a downturn in the market or a downturn in the economy, then you're going to get caught in that. It's not an ongoing sustainable solution to a budget problem. Risky financing schemes. If somebody starts talking to you about pension obligation bonds, be very, very careful because the timing has to be ideal. You have to get very good objective advice on those. National Government Finance Officers Association, in their white paper on this topic, basically just says don't do it. I've seen it be successful for some communities, but I also seen many others really get caught by this and finance officers lose their jobs. So be very careful.
Can you say a little bit more? I'm not sure I know what that means.
Oh, a pension obligation bond is where you're essentially financing your unfunded liabilities, your pension obligations, and borrowing money to pay that off with an obligation to pay it off at a lower rate over time. You can really get caught. It's an arbitrage type financing kind of a deal, and it's very risky. You have to be timing it just right. Fear and denial. Can we just sell a building? Can we just kind of paper this over until next year? And this could be coming from the mayor who's been around for a long time and just doesn't want their popularity to be soured. And they're going to move to Ensenada and retire next year. Can we just put it off a little bit? Or it could be the account clerk who really spots something and is afraid to bring it up because their job is hard enough as it is and they don't want the headache. The kind of papering over things and denying them does not help things go away. They just get worse. Toxic relationships. One member of the city council or one member in a position of power in a community can have a really poisonous effect. And we saw this happen. This was a factor in many of these cities that got into bankruptcy trouble. It might be a union head who will just not agree to believe in the numbers and the reality that city's in financial trouble and insists that you can use the water fund to fund the fire department. and insists on that and will not believe reality. Or it could be the elected city treasurer in some city, or that has their own fiefdom and is constantly at war with the city. There are cities that are struggling a lot because they have these ongoing toxic kind of relationships. And sometimes it's just one or two people that are kind of at the head of it. That can create a lot of problems just to make progress and get things done. This can all be, we can all be moving forward and things be going okay because we're kind of papering it over and managing from one year to the next and patching a little bit and getting closer and covering up, and things are okay because we've got an influx of money here to temporarily patch things. But then when the tide goes out, we can see who's not wearing a bathing suit. That's what Warren Buffett says. Eventually there's going to be an economic downturn and an unsustainable decline in core revenues, and that's when things get really hit the fan. So it makes a lot of sense to address these things up front. And the idea of our fiscal diagnostic tool that this city staff has looked at in this city already and worked with, and many other cities in California have done, is to look at what are some of the indicators that we should be looking at in this city to determine whether we're financially healthy or not. Bob Leland helped develop a model, I know, for this city that really helps with looking at that. We can think about solvency in terms of being cash. Do we have money to pay the bills in the next 30 to 60 days? Maybe we do, but we have a budgetary problem beyond this year. Maybe there's a long-run solvency issue in the longer term. That's a big issue. But maybe we've even balanced the budget in the longer term and gotten everything in the revenue and spending lines in order, but we're really not providing a reasonable level of service that the citizens of our community deserve. And so that would be what I would call service level solvency. It's challenging to do these kinds of analyses because many times the published data we're looking in the past, trying to determine what's really coming on into the future and making assumptions. Many times the numbers are just, we don't know exactly what they mean, or they're misinterpreted. What exactly are these reserves and what is our flexibility with them, for example. Many times comparisons are false. We're comparing a full service city with one that's not the same, or false comparisons. And the point is that this requires, it's not just an accounting exercise, it requires forecasting, a familiarity with the law, a familiarity with the community and the unique aspects of, well, this is our sales tax revenue, but where is this coming from? Who are the sales tax payers in our community and what's going on with them? Okay. I'm scooting through here because I want to make sure you have some more time. There are 14 different measures in the financial health diagnostic tool. This is available online. Staff can also talk to you about what they've looked at with theirs. The first 6 are very quantitative in nature and require a long-range forecasting model that this city has. And then the others are more normative in nature. Do you have policies? Have you been engaging in frequent practices of using temporary funds to balance the budget? Many of these kinds of things are reasonable one-time solutions, but if there's an ongoing practice of continuing to use these things year after year after year, then that's a sign of ill health. And I often talk about just the importance of thinking through these. This is one of the things that you as a fiscal commission could be thinking about, is looking at the different policies that this city's have. Do you have policies in each of these areas? Because just the process of thinking through these and establishing standards helps to guard against freaking out when stuff hits the fan and you don't have any basis of knowing where to go with it. And for example, a reserve policy is something you want to think about with some nuance. Some people think, well, the reserve policy for reserves for a city should be like a personal finance thing, should have 3 months of income. Well, or 17% or something of your annual total budget. But there's a variation among cities in terms of level of risk. Think about what your reserves are for is for mitigating risk. dealing with when something happens that you need to deal with. So what is the likelihood in the city of Davis of something happening with in terms of a natural disaster or a financial downturn, economic downturn in the community, of losing one employer, this massive employer that provides a huge hunk of your property tax and sales taxes? What is the risk in Davis? It's not going to be the same in Davis as it is in Folsom or in another community, in a coastal zone. The city of Laguna Beach down in Los Angeles has substantial natural disaster risks right there on the coast, roads falling into the ocean, fire risks, all those kinds of things. Their reserve levels of 50% or more are completely justified, I would argue. And your city, thinking through what the right reserve level for your city is a process of really thinking about what your levels of risk are and working through that process, not just simply taking 17% off the top. That's just one example. So, and I talked about multi-year budget forecasting because you have one and the values of that, and I think you're really good there. I wanted to just allow you then to ask any questions. I could go on to some other topics, but we've already been spending quite a bit of time tonight, so perhaps we should break here from that. See if you want to get into other kinds of things.
Yeah, do we have any clarifying questions? Then we'll do public comment and come back and do like the more substantive meaty questions, but any clarifying again?
Hi, I'm Heather Huff. Thank you so much for this presentation, super helpful. I'm curious, in our last meeting, we had a prolonged conversation about the percentage of tax that the county is taking on property taxes, and I was curious, what is the variation across the state? What's the normal percentage? Just take so we can understand how we stack up.
Yeah, and that was about the county's share of property tax revenues?
Yeah, on the
Yeah.
new housing development.
Yeah, this is a really difficult question, actually, to compare one's agency to the next. It varies among counties, as it does vary among cities, and there's some logic to that. For example, I talked about some cities don't have fire departments, so that's a rationale there. Some cities may have a large industrial zone that a lower property tax share because of the commercial industrial that provides property tax payments as well. They don't need as high a rate, and those rates were maybe established back in the 70s, and that's where things are now. The challenge with property tax shares is they were established back in 1980, essentially, based on what the relative property tax rates were in any particular area back in the 70s. And things may have changed since then. You may have a situation where, say up in Placer County, a volunteer fire department now has to be more of a professional fire department. So that little share that was just fine for them back in the 70s is no longer enough. Or you may have a public agency in an area, another fire agency in a neighboring county that was very aggressive with its property tax charges back in the 70s, and so therefore has a legacy of a really substantial property tax share as a result of that, just based on what folks charged back in those days. Some communities, some cities in California have lower shares just because they had such large sales tax revenues. They didn't need to charge as much in property tax revenues. Now they're stuck with those lower property tax shares today, even though their sales tax situation may have changed. Yolo County has, by most accounts, a strikingly low share compared to other counties. But like I say, that's difficult to compare because there are differences in urbanization among different counties. One of the other interesting sort of bits of history is the city of West Sacramento and how that got incorporated. They got a pretty good deal from the cities in their incorporation efforts because they were willing to take on a lot of, including social service responsibilities and things that the county was doing. And so West Sacramento has a fairly high level of property tax share compared to other cities, which means the county in that area gets less than it does, say, in Davis. So generally speaking, we can say they get a lower share. This is a fairly academic argument and a fairly, one we can debate. But the practicality of it is, this is a fixed pie. And it's not likely to change because where's the county going to get more revenue from? The only way to give the county more property tax share without impacting cities and special districts in Yolo County would be to shift money away from the schools and then for the state to make up more money to the schools. Essentially means that the state would have to say, oh yeah, that's really unfair, so we're gonna pass a law that reduces the level of the schools and give Yolo County more, and then the state has to pick up the funding out of the state general fund. Given the state's financial condition right now, and given that that's a very localized issue and that every other county would come in and say, oh, we've got a problem too, it's very, very unlikely to happen.
So it's not common for, a lot of this is legacy too, it sounds like. Whatever was put in place stays in place.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other clarifying questions? Okay, any public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll just open up to any and all questions or comments.
Let me ask first, you mentioned the variations between the cities. What makes Davis different from other cities? So I'm thinking of things like we're a university town, which means we have residents who come and go on both a seasonal and a 4-year schedule. We're nearly a full-service city. What other characteristics should we be keeping in mind about ourselves?
Yeah, I think you have a set of comparison cities, don't you, Kelly? Which I think of San Luis Obispo as being one, Santa Cruz perhaps, college towns.
Usually when we do comparison cities, we'll do a mix of other university towns and then other towns in the region. It kind of depends on what we're doing a comparison for.
Yeah.
If it's for workforce, that may be one set of factors, and if it is for programs, that may be a slightly different set of factors. The two that you mentioned, the university and being full-service city are probably the two biggest considerations that would make us special in our own way or define us.
And if I can ask just a totally different question, and the council's heard, or the commission's heard this one from me before. It's going to be 2 parts. I'm very concerned about an economic downturn that appears to be coming. We seem to be seeing signs of reduced growth already. Worried about the decreased government spending from the actions of especially the spring of last year, especially how it affects universities. And prices seem to be going up, which puts us in a potential stagflation situation that we haven't seen for about 50 years, 40 years. And that's very concerning to me. Add to that the risk of an AI bubble crash that hasn't started yet, but may come. We may be in for quite some stormy weather. And so the 2 questions were, what do you think are best practices for cities looking ahead and concerned about the economic outlook? And the second was, I was actually thinking of reaching out to and sending messages to people who have a lot of experience in municipal finance to ask them the same question. What do you think are best practices? What recessions were you working through, and what do you wish you'd known at the start of a recession, that sort of thing. You've mentioned Bob Leland's name a few times. Who do you think it would make sense to reach out to and ask some of these same questions?
Well, that's one. I think it's really important to be coordinating with other communities in this county, in this region, with regard to the economy and how you're viewing things and how you're preparing for that. That's one. Important to, and this city's done a very good job historically. I go back to when I first was a student here, 4 decades ago, the finance director at the time, his name is slipping my mind, was known statewide for doing these long-range financial forecasts. There's like a bike path named after him someplace in town. So we have a long history of actually having that in place. Doing the forecasting, thinking about what happens in a downturn, being very cognizant and thoughtful about where the revenues are coming from. You're so much more dependent now upon sales tax revenues. Who are the main taxpayers with that, and how are they going to be affected in that sort of downturn? There are a number of things going in favor of this city and others in a downturn. One is our reliance on property tax revenue, ironically. Property tax revenue is very stable. You can see downturns or frankly upturns coming. They take a while to get realized. It's a year and a half or so or two down the road before changes in assessed valuation really show up in revenues. So that provides some durability. It's slow to react because of the 2% or CPI regulator. It's slow to react to major changes in the economy. So property tax is a great horse to ride in a downturn. The other major thing that's going for the city in a positive sense is, unlike in the past, is that there are lots of more guardrails today on the state legislature protecting the city and local governments from actions of the state as the state gets into problems. And the state is much more dependent because it's a large dependence on income taxes and a progressive income tax structure and capital gains. On a downturn, it's going to be affected much more dramatically than local governments, at least directly. And its ability to come after cities or counties and special districts to sort of take part of our hide to solve its problem is much more limited now. They can't shift around property tax revenues, the ERAF stuff they did in the past in order to balance the budget. They cannot take the locally adopted revenues. This is all constitutionally protected by virtue of Proposition 1A of 2004 and other constitutional protections that cities and counties got together to get drafted into the Constitution. So we're in much better shape. And frankly, while the state does have a lot of problems ahead, it also is in better shape in some ways than it was in the past too, by virtue of, I really credit former Governor Jerry Brown too, who was so laser focused on fiscal responsibility and put forward Proposition 2, which imposes reserve requirements in the state of California, which are really helpful. They're not enough in themselves to get them out of the problem that they're facing right now, but they impose some fiscal discipline, which was absolutely absent before that. So.
You mentioned municipal bankruptcies. Do you see anything in Davis that gives you concern that we might be treading in that direction?
I almost studiously don't get too deep in the woods with the city because it's where I live. I don't want to be too. I want to stay up. I want to sleep at night and things. But no, I don't think. I mean, I'm concerned, as everyone is, that, as many cities do, this city's got some struggles ahead with balancing its budget. And I think you need to be very careful about that as you go into labor negotiations in particular. And as you look to how you handle the future of development in the town and the community, that's going to have an effect. I talk to planners many times. I've gone to planning conferences and talked about some of these financial things too, to try to help planning commissioners understand that it's perfectly responsible to be able to be thinking about the financial impacts of your planning decisions. It's responsible because you ought to be thinking about what's it going to cost in additional services in this particular development and what kinds of additional revenues is this going to generate. Those hopefully will balance, but it's a responsible thing for financial planning to be thinking about how this new development is going to affect the budget and our ability to provide services. So anyway, to answer your question, Eric, no, I think the city's well managed and it's going to make its way through this, but it's not without challenges, of course.
follow-up question on to this one, which is just thinking about how Davis compares to other cities. You said, like many cities, we have trouble ahead. Are other cities experiencing kind of the same types of issues that we are in our deficit, or what are some of the ranges of issues?
Yeah, very commonly, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. We're facing some of the issues that Mike talked about here, and some of this has to do with the overall economy and where things are headed with the federal government and the problems of the state. Some of it also has to do with just the effects of coming off the ARPA sort of, the federal bump that we all were feeding on from Biden and those infrastructure development improvement programs that we were all, many of us, cautioning, and every finance director was probably cautioning, like, this is not ongoing, this is one-time money, but it's hard for that to play out in reality, I think, and so we're seeing a sort of the outbreathing of losing that substantial federal funding and becoming so energized by that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Coleman, for being with us tonight. It was very interesting. My question is related to your concept of service solvency. So there's more than one way to balance a budget. You can either increase revenue or decrease expenses. So do you have a way of thinking about that, about which of those two roads to attack, or which one might take priority over the other under what circumstances? And related to that, do you have a good way of defining structural deficit? Because structural deficit can be one thing one day, and then if you cut expenses, it's a different thing on a different day. So do you have a way of thinking about that as well?
Yeah, there's some more precise definitions of how to look at this in the financial health diagnostic tool, which talks about extracting in that analysis, and I think your long-range model does this. I can say that without getting into it too deeply because I know Bob Liebman helped you develop it. And that takes the logic of really trying to look specifically at what are the ongoing revenue flows and the ongoing expenditures and taking out the one-time stuff to really focus on what's the ongoing piece. So that's one. So that's how I think about those deficits. And it's perfectly okay in looking at that, I think, to look at one-time temporary solutions to bring those, but it's the ongoing gap that becomes the critical question in terms of solvency. In terms of service...
Sorry, I don't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt, but I want to understand that is based upon the current service level, though. But if you, but balancing a budget requires you to sometimes cut services, and so you can't just say that's our structural deficit based upon what service level we decided in the past was appropriate.
Right. Well, yes, and so in this analysis, you're really looking at multiple scenarios as well. If we were there are a number of unfunded liabilities potential beyond just the pension kind of unfunded liabilities that we think of when we use that term. But if we were maintaining our roads at a level that we think is necessary, here's where the expenditures would be. That's a level of expenditures that's not even included in the budget, for example. What are the other levels of service where this is not where we really want to be? That's another kind of a question that's off budget. And so I think what the model does is suggest that those are two different questions, like balancing the budget based on our current service levels, as you say, and then balancing it if we would bring up to where we'd like to be ideally in terms of providing an adequate level of service. Yeah.
Can I weigh in here a little bit on some specifics with our model? One of the benefits of the long-range model that Michael has referred to, that Bob Leland does for us, is it allows us to do and play around with some what-if scenarios. So to your point, Commissioner Harper, if we choose to fund our transportation infrastructure at a higher percentage, what does that end up doing to our long-range forecast for our general fund? And I should note that the model is a general fund model. It's not all the other funds that we have or the enterprise funds. It allows us to say, well, what would happen if we were in negotiations with one or more of the labor groups and we provided this amount in terms of a COLA, what would that then do to our long-range forecast? So it's a powerful tool for us to be able to use to determine these what-if scenarios, to say, okay, are we going to need to, what kind of combination are we going to need to do in terms of potential service reductions, maybe enhancements of service other places, like transportation infrastructure, and then our actual cost cutting. So.
Good.
I'm also curious along these lines if there's like a normative guide out there for what the gold standard is for service delivery, because to Kevin's point, it's you could just say we're not going to do anything and that'll balance the budget, and that could be widely have a lot of variation across cities. So I'm curious if there is that normative guide.
Yeah, there are a lot, and of course it depends upon the particular area. The fire service has a whole bunch of standards they've established, nationwide for what is an adequate level of staffing or response times, and you'll find those in every one of the many disciplines that cities are involved in. There's one place, source to find this, I think ICMA, the International City Management Association, publishes, was involved in this many years ago, performance measurement standards for municipal functions. You have to be, I think, cognizant when you start to wade into that of whether this performance standard is really a service outcome, a performance outcome, or just an effort level. For example, staffing per 1,000 doesn't necessarily tell you how you're mitigating crime or whether you're responding to calls for service in an adequate manner. Just it's numbers of staffing per population. That's different than the whether you're providing an adequate level of service to people. It might have a relationship, but it's not the same.
I was going to mention another area. My mic's, is your mic live?
Yes,
Your mics are
mine
live.
is.
I'm going to just stand
Oh,
here for, no, I'm just going to stand here for a second so you can all hear me, because I really appreciated, this one's not, is it? Oh, very good. I just wanted to mention another one that's been, as Michael said, the service level really, or what's required in any particular area varies. Like fire service is very specific standards they are legally required to meet. One of the things that's been of great interest to council and to the city over the last many years has been the condition of our roads. As you all know, we hear about this all the time. And so there is actually a very specific measure called a pavement condition index, which 10 years ago I probably never heard of. But now all of us are very, very familiar with that. So it is a way of measuring the quality of your pavement. And a council subcommittee a number of years ago met and said, okay, what's the condition that we really want to see our roads up to? Well, okay, it's not going to be perfect, it's not going to be 100, but what's really a good, acceptable standard for our community that we want to meet? And then they spent a lot of time figuring out what the expected cost of meeting that level, that condition might be, and they came up with a 10-year plan. But as with all plans, right, best laid plans, the actual cost of that kind of infrastructure improvement increased exponentially post-COVID. So it sort of threw a little monkey wrench into that plan. But we do have very specific areas where, especially ones that are of importance, when we look at those and we figure out what is the standard we're trying to meet, what's that level, and how do we get there, what's the long-range plans for getting there. That just, I wanted to give you that one example in case you weren't familiar with that.
over the last few years, Davis has had a couple of very large, prominent litigation settlements. And I wanted to ask, is there anything we should be thinking about if Davis is doing things like other cities, and I don't even know if other cities, if this was a larger percentage in the last few years, larger outlays than we might have expected if we were doing things like other cities. If it is though, and we got unlucky, then the answer is insurance. But if it's not bad luck, if there's something that's causing higher risk that's worth addressing, then maybe there's something we should look at. So I wanted to ask about risk. Is there anything we should be looking at in terms of helping the city manage risk so that we don't have these, seems like one-time unlucky charges, but if you really look hard, maybe there's something going on that we could be doing more to address and make these types of events less likely.
Well, this strays a bit out of my particular area of expertise, but so I see Kelly may have some thoughts there. I mean, one of the only thing that comes to my mind immediately is be careful when you're budgeting about cutting training. Because there's, you increase liability when your employees are not properly trained, particularly in areas of harassment and those kinds of things. So, yeah.
So one of the areas that we were just talking about are our infrastructure, whether that is our roads, whether that is our sidewalks, our trees, our buildings and facilities. The infrastructure is something that is very important for us, and I think a place where we need to be very cognizant to assess our risk. We have had two situations, one a court judgment and another a settlement in the past year for things that happened in previous years that have then caused us to have conversations or initiate conversations with the council about what we want our programs to look like, our service levels to look like, related to our trees, our urban forestry program, or urban forest program, and then also our how we treat and handle our sidewalks. Those kinds of things, those conversations are already started, and we are looking at them, and those are the kinds of things where we want to make sure that we are, to the extent appropriate and possible, minimizing the city's risk as an organization, but still looking to achieve the program and policy objectives that are of importance to the community. So it's trying to find that balance. Not an easy task. And the issue with sort of the insurance industry outside of just the city, but the insurance industry in general is increasingly problematic with what are called these like nuclear payouts. And that's something that we are paying close attention to and working with the Joint Powers Authority, YC Premier, which is our risk agency. It's public agencies within Yolo County to try to protect all of us as best as possible. But that piece is a challenge.
Michael, you mentioned that cities can have a situation where they have plenty of money in restricted funds and still have a lot of problems in the general fund. And so are there strategies for cleaning restricted funds so that you can use them better for the general fund purposes? So I know the main two, cost allocation for the charges and fees, and cost allocation of overhead to grants and other restricted services. So that may be a question for staff, is how well we're doing those two pieces. Are there other strategies to clean restricted funds?
You name the first one that comes to mind. Make sure you have an updated cost allocation plan that's healthy. The other one is make sure your fees are covering costs, and that's related to your cost allocation plan. One goes with the other. Yeah, those are the main two ones that come to mind. You have to be, there's differences among different types of funds, as you may know. You have to be very careful about how you handle these kinds of things, but there are So that we used, prior to Proposition 13 and 218, we had more flexibility in terms of the relationship between the general fund and enterprise funds. Now it's you have to be very careful about any interfund transfers and how you handle those depending on the type of fund. Having said that, we were looking at the different types of fees and charges. I'm trying to think of specifics for Davis, but Davis had a golf course, its own golf course, and was charging entrance fees for that. And then there was a surplus amount of revenues. Those are rental fees. They don't have the same cost limitation restrictions, right? Because they're access to government property kinds of fees than water fees do. So you can look at these different colors of revenues in different ways.
So what about the enterprise fund? So you can charge interfund transfers to, or the enterprise fund share of administrative costs to the enterprise fund. There is a lot of ways of calculating indirect costs. And so do you see gigantic differences between cities, or are they starting to hone in on a particular way of calculating those kinds of
I haven't really looked at much of a survey, but I don't think there's that much variation in how those kinds of things are done that I know of. Yeah, it's a good question.
I think we all end up using the same consultant pools.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that they're that different. We do have, we have enterprise funds. Those have pretty bright lines in terms of how those monies can be used, and they don't cross those lines. So if the money is colored purple, then it's purple and it doesn't get to be used for something that's red or blue or green. We also have, in our budgeting process, internal service funds. So for those things that are those administrative type things, and I'll use fleet, Alexis can speak to this, probably in her sleep.
Yes.
But fleet or information services are technology pieces where all departments are going to need to use different amounts and of that particular type of a service. And so there are calculations that are done that are part of our budget that then go to make sure that we have adequate fleet revenue, if you will, coming in from our own budget to pay for those costs. In addition to that, making sure that the replacement costs are being put away. So if the police department buys a new vehicle, great, wonderful, we handle those annual operating costs. But then we are also each year putting away X percentage of money that is going to go to replace that vehicle when it reaches the end of its useful life. So we are in, I would say, decent shape. There's room for improvement, of course, but in decent shape with having those systems in place so that when a car breaks down or a roof is leaking or something of that nature, we do have funds that are set aside to replace that piece of equipment or to address certain repairs.
So are you also charging a share of city management, accounting, HR to the enterprise fund?
Yes.
I will say, as a follow-up to that, Kevin, that some cities, many cities, don't do as well with that as Davis is. They don't think ahead for replacement funds in particular. The overhead charges, perhaps, that's sort of the first step. But actually setting aside money for replacement, many cities cut quarters on that. And so that's a good sign.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, I had a couple quick questions. One is more curiosity, not specific to Davis, but when you were talking about the voter threshold requirements for general taxes versus special taxes, I've always found it a little counterintuitive that restricted funds have a higher voter threshold since they're restricted.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you just knew the rationale for that.
Yeah, this is a fun question, isn't it? Yeah, because I've seen this idea like, what? Shouldn't it be a lower threshold if we're willing to earmark funds? And I said, well, let's imagine the world then. If we had a lower threshold, if you earmarked funds, everybody would be earmarking funds all over the place. And you've already heard how I think that makes a city less healthy when you have earmarking and special funds and restrictions and everything. So frankly, I like this rule the way it is. It wasn't done out of deference to Michael Coleman's idea of good government, though. It was done by taxpayer groups who, in reality, it's even more circuitous than that. Proposition 13 had the term special taxes, said special taxes require 2/3 voter approval, and here's all these other rules about property taxes. It didn't define what a special tax was. It took a court case later on, and it took 4 years to work this through the courts to figure out what is a special tax that requires 2/3 voter approval. Municipalities argued that it must be a tax that's specific purpose or something like that. And the proponents of Proposition 13 said, we meant any tax other than property taxes, which you can't raise anyway. Any tax. The court said, you said special tax. We tend to, as attorneys, attach meaning to words. You said special. Special means something. The court said special tax means it's tax for a specific purpose. And that became the rule at that point. And interestingly enough, following that ruling then, the special tax required 2/3 voter approval according to Proposition 13. What does a general tax require? Prop 13 didn't say anything about a general tax. So at that point, a general tax didn't have a voter approval requirement. Until later on when future measures came through and ended up closing that loophole, perceived loophole. So it really was about, from the taxpayer's perspective, making it harder to impose taxes. And if it was going to be easier because you earmarked it, then they wanted to raise the threshold. And I guess that's the logic. From my standpoint as a good government person, I kind of like it the way it is because I like the bias in favor of general purpose taxes.
Thank you. I've tried to Google the answer to that before, and I
Yeah.
couldn't find it. So I appreciate the expertise here. And then to go back to when you were talking about diagnosing city financial health, on the issue of like unsustainable or intractable employee compensation, I feel like when we were looking at the Davis budget this past year, there was a lot of grumblings like online from the public about Davis's employee compensation being brought up to market rate. And I'm curious if you could say more about what you've seen in other cities that makes it unsustainable. Like, is it being far above market rate, or is it low enough that we're not, it's inefficient because you're losing people? Like, what do you look for that leads to the assessment of something being unsustainable?
Wow, boy. Unsustainable can't be sustained with your existing. Some cities are probably luckier than others that they have the financial ability not to worry about plenty of revenue coming in. You can afford whatever the employees to give you generosity. I think most cities are in the financial pickle of wanting to provide generous benefits to employees, but really having to hold the line in order to be financially within what they can afford. And that's a really hard situation to be in, let alone the politics of all of it. So, and I don't know how to measure that. Many communities, of course, look at comparison agencies. I think you kind of know something that's excessive when you see it. That's why I use the example of Stockton being a month of vesting. Obviously, that's outrageous. I don't kind of know where to go with that. But if you're in a situation where you're granting long-term employee guarantees in a multi-year contract and you don't know how you're going to come up with the money to fund those, that's a problem.
Thank you. Any final questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. Thank you for coming on our questions.
And Michael also provided a PDF document that is, I think, a summary of the slideshow.
And more.
And more. So we'll send that out to the commission tomorrow so that everybody can have that in case you want to take a look at it or end up with additional questions.
Thank you. Well, with that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, item 7 on the subcommittees. 7A, Subcommittee on Socially Responsible Investment Policy. Commissioners Butler and Murabayashi, you want to start us off?
All right, thanks everyone. I'm excited to present our memo for the second time. Let's see, let me just pull it up really fast.
Would it be helpful if we pulled it up on the screen so that
Yes.
everybody can see it? Okay, hang on, give us a second.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question? Because Kelly, I did see the email earlier today, but you referenced the September memo, and this one's still dated as August, but it also has highlighting, and the other one didn't. So can you just say a little bit about what
Sure.
version we're working on?
First, apologies. I grabbed the memo that went out at the August meeting and sent that out with the packet. When I sent the packet out last week, that was my fault, so I apologize. Commissioner Viola was able to catch that today and let me know about it. So in September, you received an updated memo. It was still dated August 28th, but that was the updated memo that you received. Because of my error, I just went to compare the two memos and tried to highlight the salient points where there were major differences, so that if you had already looked at the wrong memo that I had, or the earlier memo that I had sent out, you could just focus on the yellow highlights. That's all.
Thank you.
Where do you want me to navigate in this?
We can just start, the first page is good. Just to briefly state what the purpose of the subcommittee was. So we were asked to review the city investment policy and to present some information to the city council about ways to better align the investment policy of the city with socially responsible principles. Just a little bit of background on what we did. We reviewed the policy, and we have it here on the first page if you want to look at it. And then we reviewed the city's investments with the former director at DARE. This is on page 2, but the investment information we have is a little bit old from last year, but it kind of shows you how the investments are broken up. And very little of this investment is actually within our purview to direct anywhere with any kind of restrictions, because most of it are, if you see the camp and lake investments, those are investments that we don't have any discretion over where they go. Those are public investment funds that we wouldn't be able to alter where our resources are allocated. So that was that was our review of the investments. And so if you look at the next page, we did a little bit of discussion of the idea of socially responsible investment in general. And I think the main takeaway that we learned from our discussion with our investment manager is that mainly these decisions about trying to invest in things that align with your values are more about policy, and they're not so much shown in the real world to drive change. So mainly what we're talking about is values here. We're not talking about being activists that are going to produce some change out in the world. It's more about stating principles that we think are important to our community. And so then the next thing that we presented was the different ways we discussed with our investment manager that we might change our investment to align with community values. And so we present a range of options. There's 3 of them. And I should footnote the third option, because after we developed these different opportunities, the investment manager, PFMM, stated that they actually wanted to review the third option. So the first 2 options, they didn't have any qualifications or need to discuss further, but the third option, they said they needed to discuss a little further. So as far as the opportunity to pursue the third option, we can't say whether or not that is an opportunity right now, and we're waiting to hear back from our investment manager about that. But basically, the first 2 options are, first one is produce a few more modest changes, and the second option is to produce a little bit more restrictive changes, but both are not at any cost to the city, and both are easily achievable by our investment manager, and were shown not to affect the investment profits that we realize, and they wouldn't cost us anything to implement because our investment manager could do them for free, essentially. So those were those three options. And then the last thing that we had discussed in addition to those was there is another opportunity to create an exclusion for city investments based on a proprietary list of exclusions for what the American Friends Society discusses as like the occupation watch list for investments that are used in activities that participate in or facilitate. And now we're still on this page that has the policy options. But these are activities that facilitate genocide, apartheid, or war crimes or crimes against humanity. And so this is a proprietary list of companies that are excluded based on their participation in these activities. It's developed by the American Friends Society. It's in use by various organizations. This one would require a little bit of work every year for the city staff to check if that list has changed and then provide that information to our investment manager about the companies that are now on or not on that list. And I think when we checked, there was only one company that is invested in that City of Davis is holding that would be affected by that. So it's minimal change to our actual companies we invest in, but it does kind of require the most activity and work from the city staff because it would require them to review annually. So that's one consideration for that. We had presented this previously. There were a number of questions. We did include all of those that we could write down and answer. So those are all addressed in the appendix. And then we also, in the appendix, go through the different glossary of terms that we use to define different industries that are relevant to the things we may or may not want to put our investments in because we think that they do or don't align with the City of Davis's values. So tonight, what we were going to ask is to look at this memo, which is a presentation of the work that we've completed, and then we were going to make a motion and see if the commission wants to present this memo to the City Council for their consideration, to consider whether or not they want to use one of these options, use also the American Friends Society investment restrictions or not. And then we also wanted to make two other decisions from the commission, whether or not the commission wanted to recommend that the council adopt the second option of the three options that I had discussed. So that's the second thing we're going to ask the commission to discuss and vote on. And the third one is whether or not the commission wants to recommend the American Friends Society occupation restrictions. So that's kind of the work that we did and what we brought to the commission to consider.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for our subcommittee? Yeah, okay.
So once again, very good work on this. I'm supportive of virtually everything in here. As a matter of fact, everything in here, but I do have two questions. On the new amendment, the human rights investment exclusions, it points out a source for getting that, the American Friends Service Committee. Was wondering if the subcommittee considered the federal government suspended the barred list, which is a list that they keep of companies and nonprofit organizations that are not legitimate receivers of federal funds because they have done something. So is it worthwhile to consider that as another source of potential companies that we might want to invest in?
I think what I can speak to with that question is that, so this methodology this was chosen because the methodology kind of focuses on very recognized, transparent principles that are based on the UN guiding principles. And so we wanted a scoring framework that would kind of avoid any sort of ad hoc decision-making, something that's structured around defined criteria and documentation rather than like maybe political judgments or anything like that. And so that is why this one was particularly chosen. It's also global as opposed to focusing on various geographies. It's objective, it's bounded by fiduciary guardrails, like implementation occurs within a reasonable timeline, where it doesn't materially affect returns or impose undue costs. And these were all of the kind of components that went into choosing this particular one.
Okay, my second question is back on the Appendix D, under option 1, you list the industries that we would not be investing in. And it lists aerospace defense, number 14, 15, aerospace defense equipment, and electronics military. I'm wondering, I think I agree with all the others, but I'm wondering why those. There's certainly some of that may be falling into the line of explosives and firearms and other things, but not the whole category, and certainly not a lot of really good things that are in this category. So, wondering about that.
So you're talking specifically about option 1, where
Yeah, it's listed in option 1 as
Yeah.
14, 15.
So essentially, one thing to also recognize is that there are current exclusions for the the city already has exclusions in place. One of them is weapons manufacturing. And so this is really endeavoring to clarify what that means and break it down. That's one component of that. The other piece is that, sorry, let me just scroll down to that particular one. So you were talking about the aerospace defense equipment, electronics, explosives, firearms, and ammunition. So the reason that we recommended number 2 is instead of having a blanket exclusion across all of these things, 2 essentially has a little bit of a blanket exclusion on like energy, gaming, aerospace, but then targeted related to revenue for military contracting, controversial weapons, and small arms. And that was a way to kind of maybe, instead of having a blanket across all of those aerospace, defense, electronics, military, to make it a little bit more specific.
So are you saying that's in our current policy? 14,
So
15,
right
16?
now, the current policy excludes, I'll just read this, fossil fuel, so if 51% or, no, I think it's greater than 51% of revenues come from fossil fuels, weapons manufacturing, cigarettes, alcohol, or gambling products. And so weapons manufacturing, a lot of that does happen within aerospace and defense. And so this is really just to clarify, here are the various industry, or the sectors that are being covered by the policy that's in place right now. I don't know if I answered you exactly the way you wanted, so I can go in a different direction too.
No, I think you've answered my question, and my thought is, can we or should we revise this to be more specific about the weapons portion of those industries rather than a blanket prohibition on an entire industry?
I think I understood it to mean the component of like companies that are involved in aerospace for defense purposes. So I think it's like more trying to target military industrial complex activities. That's the way that I understood it.
Well, but that's not what it says. It says no city of Davis directive is to be made in a company with any of these following industries. So it's pretty specific saying we shouldn't.
Yeah, maybe I'm not understanding your question, because I thought you were asking to clarify what are we excluding with this one, and I thought I was
Well,
trying
no,
to...
I'm now suggesting that we change the wording to not make a blanket exclusion of those entire sub-industries. And instead,
On just aerospace and defense, or are we talking about the ones in option 1?
well, I'm only bringing up aerospace, defense, and electronics, military.
I guess, so that was, You make a good point. Option 2 is sort of the one that we
Yeah,
that we're recommending,
which
and that
I-
one has the
yeah,
aerospace
I
and
like
defense as opposed to the electronics military, because we felt that that an additional revenue-based screen related to military contracting small arms, that would kind of maybe cover some of those electronics, but specifically related to military purposes. And that's why we didn't want to recommend option 1, because it was too much of a blanket across so many different sectors, but option 2 created a little bit more specificity.
But perhaps it would be friendly if you wanted to exclude those from the recommendations for consideration. We could make that something we could all discuss, like vote on
Okay.
together.
yeah,
so that, you know,
I
put it to
would,
the
I would
commission.
make that,
Absolutely. Yeah, we can just put it down so we can make sure that the commission can discuss.
I should have paused some questions, because I'm gonna pause on questions real quick and see if we have public comment on this before we continue. Okay, see none, let's continue.
So I'm new to the commission since the last report came out, and so I just want to say to both of you, thank you. This is really helpful to try to dive in. I just have a clarifying question to really understand the differences between the options and current policy. So let me say it and see if this is right. So current policy has 51% revenue threshold with certain industries. Option 1 opens that up and says that blanket industries would be excluded. Option 2 is most like the current policy, except it adds some new industries, including the occupations list. Is that correct?
It's close, but the occupations list is actually not one of these options. It's another option. We should have put it as, because it's, what we're going to ask is to consider to recommend among one of these options 1, 2, or 3. And then just to discuss like the history of how we did our work. After we had completed this in discussion with our investment manager, we had found another thing that we thought would be interesting to put to the city council to let them know there's this opportunity to also use this other tool. So it's something separate. So it's not one of the options, and it's going to be a separate thing to consider whether or not the commission thinks it's something recommendable or not.
Okay, and this list in option 2 is the same list as in, because it's just not listed the same way, so I'm trying to make sure I understand it. It's the same list as in option 1, except aerospace, defense equipment, and electronics and military is not on it. Okay, thank you.
I think I understand this, but it's presumed that CAMP, I don't know what that acronym stands for, and LAIF, I think I know what that acronym stands for, are not subject to this policy?
That's right, because they are managed by the state treasurer's office, there's not really
Okay.
anything there that we would do.
Okay. And then I appreciate the last clarification from Commissioner Moribayashi, because I think I understand it clearly now. So this additional amendment is just basically a blanket exclusion, regardless of whether it's greater than 25%, less than 25%, for those corporations that are on the, quote, American Friends Service Committee occupation list.
Yes, that's right.
So regardless, and some of these companies, I'm guessing they have a very minimal footprint, but they're on the list. So no investment in any of those companies.
I think there was just Caterpillar, I think was the only company on this Friends Society list that we have any involvement with. So yes, that's
That
right.
we have only,
That
that's
we
the only
invest in.
company we have involvement with the
Today.
city's current investments. But that could change in the future. There's a lot of very well-known big companies that are on that list.
You are correct.
And it's also, I mean, I didn't look at every one of those companies, but the rationale, the themes seem to be pretty consistently that it's involved in the Israel-Palestine conflict.
I think think that,
I didn't see any other examples that didn't touch on Israel or Palestine.
So actually, if you go into, more deeply into the website, it does break out that there are lots of different countries that are named. The ones that, that are on the list currently that are investable companies by the city of Davis are related to that particular conflict. But it is not, and that's why this one was chosen, because it's global. It's not related to a particular geography.
so while
Well,
today it may be about those companies or the ones involved with that conflict, as you're stating for tomorrow or in the future, it may be some other or multiple other places.
okay. Yeah, I was just scrolling through and reading these publicly traded companies, and I did not find a single example that didn't involve Israel, the West Bank, that part of very specific geography in the world. So,
Well, how long has this index been around?
It's a good question. I don't have the answer to that right now.
I would say that if it hasn't been around very long, we probably shouldn't be using it.
well, I would also add, it's an advocacy organization, and do we really want to get in the middle of that?
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah, good points.
And my other question would be not about the politics of it, but the administrative feasibility, because it sounds like these other ones are real easy. It's just they press a button, it's done. And I'm curious about whether adding the occupation adds a lot of difficulty.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because this is the only option that requires any work on the city staff, and as we know, city staff already has a ton of work. So it's a very important consideration. Think about whether we want to give them more work to do.
Now, I wanted to build on what Eric just said too. So first of all, this is my first time talking about this. It's my first meeting, or my second meeting, so my first where we discussed it. And I'm just enthusiastic support. I also agree with the premise that this would be more symbolic than practical. And if you're going to do a thing that's more symbolic than practical, we should consider being loud about it. So that's a piece of feedback I might give to the council, which is we're doing this thing, the whole point is to be symbolic. I'm not saying we should be super loud about it, but it makes no sense to do something symbolic and then keep it quiet. So we should say something about this if that's the goal. And make whatever noise we think is practical about it, and let them call us woke or whatever, but I think there's a pretty important principle of if people are causing harm, let's not have our money go to fund them causing harm. So I love this idea. And then I wanted to say about the occupation-based screening from what we've just heard. I had the same reaction as Eric, where I clicked the link that's in here, saw a huge number of companies involved in the Israel conflict, and that brings up, what are we trying to say? What is the symbolic statement we're trying to make? If you go down that road, it has a pretty high risk of overwhelming the rest of what you're trying to do. As soon as the word Israel is said, that tends to become all of it. And the rest of the benefit of doing this might be lost in terms of the symbolic statement we're trying to make. Basically, there are a lot of people out there who are looking for somebody, perhaps a blue California town, that adopts a list of Israeli companies that they're not investing in, that they won't invest in, and say this is all part of whatever else they want to say is the agenda. So I wanted to be cautious about that. And maybe say that think hard about where the focus should be. And I say this, I want to disclose, I'm also Jewish, a person who's not terribly happy with the Israeli government policies of right now. And if we go down a road where we do the friends list, it would be very important in our messaging to distinguish actions of the current Israeli government from the people of Israel. From the Jewish people, we would not want someone to say that all Americans are in favor of invading Greenland and whatever happened in Venezuela just because our government may be in favor of those things. So it would be we'd have to be very careful with messaging if we decide to do that.
I think those are great points, and I think people should consider you have to be very careful about these things. You make yourself a target. So I'm really glad that you raised those points.
Yeah, maybe I could just make a comment to round out the feedback. First of all, appreciate the work, total support option 2 and the hybrid model. I share the same concerns about the human rights exclusion, just because when I look at it, it just seems so focused on Israel and maybe no comment about, I mean, innocent people dying at the hands of aggressors. Terrible anywhere, but just the fact that it's so focused on it seems to be so focused on this one particular region more rather than just sort of the general principle wherever it's occurring and sort of identifying companies on that basis more globally. That makes me very uncomfortable. The fact that the list is coming from another party, whereas, with option 2, like we're more or less deciding for ourselves what we're going to exclude. So I guess for those reasons, I'd be uncomfortable with the human rights based exclusion.
I have another question about option 2. Just looking more closely at those categories. It includes energy services, which as different from oil and gas producers, and energy is often defined broadly, including with renewable sources. So I would want more information about what that category includes and not want to exclude renewable energy producers.
Yeah, the way I understood it when we had talked with our investment manager was we were thinking of just the fossil fuel component of the energy sector, but we could also put that to a recommendation that we would ask if the commission would like to make sure that's included in our recommendation, that any restrictions should not include restrictions to avoid renewable energy sources.
Yeah, it's just the specific on the table on page 12. It includes energy services. So that's what I'm specifically pointing out as separate from oil and gas producers. And it seems like we could keep oil and gas producers and take off energy services and do the job of making sure we don't exclude.
Maybe I could just clarify something there. I think that it's generally understood that means oil and gas service
Energy
providers.
producers,
So
that terminology.
I don't think anybody on the PFM side or whatever would look at that and assume there's some
Got
renewables.
And this is also based on how Bloomberg classifies companies, and so with like energy services, kind of like energy equipment and services, so like oil field services, upstream oil and gas, like those tend to be within that, and that's the reason that it's labeled energy services. It's because it covers kind of companies that service oil and gas exploration and production.
Got it, thanks, that's helpful.
So are we moving this, are we going to take action on this and then move this to a recommendation from this commission to the council?
So whenever we're finished with all the comments and discussion, then the 3 things that I had planned to vote on were, first one would be whether or not the commission thinks that this memo we should present to the city council to consider. So that's the first one with no, and you can see everything that's in the memo. We actually put that the subcommittee favors option 2. So just in its entirety. So that'll be the first thing we'll ask the commission to decide if they want to recommend. The second thing we'll ask the commission to consider, to vote on, is if commission thinks, as a commission, we should recommend option 2. And then the third thing is whether as a commission we think that we should recommend the occupation exclusion list as a commission. And then we're also your item that you brought up. We'll discuss.
Okay, any other questions or any motions to entertain?
Whenever we're finished, I'm ready.
One very quick question for the two of you. Given the conversation we just had, are there any other changes you think ought to be made to the memo?
I don't have any. I think it's nice to present just our work in this form to the council and let the council use their wisdom to. I think that was our objective, like our project that we were tasked with in the beginning, which was to do this work on it and give it to city council, and they are very capable of using that work to do whatever they think is in the best interest of the community.
Okay, the one thing I'd point out is near the end, it looks like the list of companies on the last couple of pages got cut off. So that looks incomplete. It cuts off at the letter F, if you see what I mean. So I think when we vote, my suggestion would be we vote to send them the memo, but also that you know, complete the list.
Make sure it runs through, yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, does anyone want to try presenting a motion?
I would present that I move that the fiscal commission receive this memo, and direct that it be transmitted to city council for their, informationally, as they consider the city's investment policy updates.
A second.
Is the motion intended to be with revisions that we haven't yet agreed upon?
No, it'll be in this form, and then the revisions, we can vote on it as a commission, that those will be separate.
Okay, so sorry, so the motion is to present this memo as written, but with the completed lists?
Yeah.
Correct, right? To council for their consideration, and just like a neutral presenting, not like a recommendation from fiscal commission.
Yeah, that's right, because there's a lot of like research-related information in there, so I think just that we receive it and send that research over to them.
Well, I hate to be nitpicky, but it kind of matters if we decided that we were not going to take out the human rights-based section. I'd probably vote no, and if we vote on it before we decide that, I'll vote, I don't know how I'll vote.
I guess that's why Mitchell had discussed having separate motions. One is just to receive the memo, not accept anything that's in it, or make a recommendation related to it, but there's research within this to provide to the council from the subcommittee. And then that's why we structured it kind of separately, and that we wanted to then discuss out of the three options related to the Bloomberg sectors, which of those would we like to recommend, if any at all, and then the human rights screen being the final piece, if we recommend that at all, and just to kind of separate them out a little bit and not complicate.
Just pause. Kelly has something?
Maybe I can make a suggestion that would be helpful. This is totally up to the commission, but if the commission chooses to submit this memo in this form, we can always have it be accompanied with a memo from staff or from the subcommittee that explains this was the original memo provided back in September. The commission had whatever changes you're going to make that are these recommendations, or just to explain that the memo itself is really there for informational purposes, and the final recommendation, if it ends up being different, we can delineate that. That might help get at your issue. The other option is to amend the memo itself, if that's the commission's will.
It sounds very confusing to have a memo and then a letter that says, never mind, part of that memo.
I think the only thing that, if I understood correctly from the discussion, that we were wanting to change, I think was the point that you had raised.
And the additional amendment. Those two items.
The human rights space.
But those are going to be voted on separately, whether we want to recommend them or not. This memo is just the work of the subcommittee, so we're just presenting our work, but
But it's in the
not.
memo.
Yeah,
They're both in the memo.
correct, because that was part of our work, but you're not recommending them. This is just information from what the subcommittee had done. So you're not, by approving to give this to to the city council, you're not saying as a commissioner that you support or don't support, you just support giving this information.
So this memo is coming from the subcommittee, not from the commission. Is that right? Is that typical?
It is
What?
Well, I think it's a little semantic, because it is coming from the commission insofar as we're going to have a commission either present it to the city council or not, so that actually is coming from you. But I can understand how you could see it as another way, that's totally reasonable interpretation, but you definitely have a say whether or not this goes to council or not, and so actually, you are gonna be, partly responsible for that.
It would not go forward to the council without, whatever it is, would not go forward to the council unless the majority of the commission votes to move it forward. So, but it is currently listed as being from the subcommittee.
A helpful amendment, or like an amendment to the memo might be to just remove the language about it being a recommendation, and just present it as an additional amendment option. Would that be, would that sort of like satisfy that concern?
Leslie, you're saying take out the word recommended?
Yeah, because I noticed in the memo it says it's a policy recommendation, so if we just took out that language and changed it to like an additional option for council to consider.
You could also add the word potential instead. So a potential recommendation is, and it's clear we're laying out options.
Yeah, I don't, would that satisfy that concern, Commissioner Fritz?
Yeah, I think, yes.
Okay,
To add
I'll say yes.
to add the word potential or to strike it entirely, or both.
Well, I'm gonna vote for striking it entirely when we get to that point, but you're telling me we're not there yet, so I'm willing to go the road you're taking us down, so, sorry.
All right. So then,
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could, and I'm, obviously, as Kelly said, you're gonna decide to do whatever you wanna do, but I'm just gonna offer you kind of a council member perspective in terms of what happens when a commission recommendation comes up to us. And simplicity is key, and clarity is key, okay? And I already had sort of a question as you were making your first motion, because it said we're providing this to council for informational purposes, yet it clearly within its body contains recommendations. And so I do think you probably, I would suggest some clarification here, either, because when council receives your memo, they will read it literally, and then when they see the word recommended, they will say that is what majority of the commission recommended. So if it isn't, I would think it would be cleaner to clarify it in a single motion, perhaps if you wanted to modify a couple of minor places here. So maybe you want to start with some smaller motions that are more about what, if any, amendments might be made to the memo, and then vote on the memo being transmitted with a recommendation, if that isn't too complicated for you.
no, that makes sense to me. Okay, so we haven't,
Can I withdraw my motion?
yes, thank you.
Okay, I would like to withdraw my motion, and I would like to make a new motion to essentially receive this as a commission and forward it for informational purposes to the council with the amendments that the things that say recommendation in there are moved as option, like these are options, like option 1, 2, 3, 4, and those are the amendments that are made within the memo. So it retains the information without any sort of recommendation associated beyond whatever else is decided.
It seems, my interpretation of this guidance though was that maybe what we should do is vote on what we recommend as a commission, and then make those edits to the report so that they get one report that says the commission recommends this, and here are other options that we researched. Because I agree with you in the spirit of sharing, there's a lot of great research in there, but I think if it's organized around what we recommend, with the commission didn't choose to recommend this, for example, but here's the background on it.
I also recognize this is the third meeting where we've discussed this, but it may be better to get the vote on what we think the recommendation should be, and then give time to rewrite it and vote on the text if we need to at a future meeting. I don't know if there's any rush to get this to the commission, and it may be cleaner to have a set of text that the commission votes on that we all can see, rather than vote on amendments that leave some folks with some discretion about how to rewrite it.
So right now, we have a motion that was motion to present this with the sections that say recommended, to strike those, if I understood. Is that right?
I'm a little bit confused about what the motion has become, so I'm just gonna withdraw it and I'll try to clarify this. Well, actually, yeah, I'll just withdraw my motion for a second, just to ask another clarifying question. So for making the amendments to the memo, I guess I'm not quite sure like what the timeline, like how that works. So there's obviously a lot of different changes that we've discussed here, which I think would be very valuable to include and helpful and clear. How, if we were to amend them, would we have to come back to this setting and then vote on all of these things again? Or how does that work, just from a process perspective?
So you have, in that case, you have two choices. Either you decide what changes, you agree on what changes you want to make, and then the subcommittee makes them, you return at the next meeting, and you vote on I'll call it the final. Or you authorize the subcommittee to make the changes. You explain to the subcommittee what those changes are going to be, and then go ahead and say that once those changes are made, that gets forwarded to the city council, so you don't come back. It depends on how concrete the changes are, and whether or not the commission as a group feels comfortable that the changes will reflect the things that you're thinking about.
I feel like maybe what I'm understanding is the two main things people are, what I'm understanding people are concerned about is making a recommendation in the memo at all, and then also the occupation list. So I think maybe we could see if we could vote on excluding those from the memo, and that might give us a memo that the commission felt comfortable presenting.
Yeah, let's go with the changes. Let's vote on the changes.
Okay, so.
But don't we want to present a recommendation? We don't just want to present an informational memo.
Well,
I agree with you.
Yeah, I also, I'm of the same mind. I think that we can also make a motion, do we want to vote? I would motion to recommend option 2, and we can vote on that. So we have a kind of a series of motions.
And can I make another procedural suggestion, which is, we can vote on what we think ought to happen tonight, and then ask the commission to rewrite the memo, and then put the memo on the consent calendar at the next meeting. It comes through to us, if everyone's happy with it, we just say consent and keep moving, we don't need to discuss it again.
Okay, let me try this. Oh, unless there's further discussion. So first motion, I would say to motion to strike the sections of the memo that state we recommend, there's one section that says we recommend option 2. And
Again, I hate to complicate it, but
go ahead.
if we are going to make a recommendation tonight, then it probably makes sense for the memo to say what the recommendation is. So why don't we vote first on what the recommendations will be, and then vote second on how the memo ought to change to reflect those recommendations?
Can I offer some unsolicited guidance, so that, would that help or not? You don't have to do everything in the form of a formal motion. You can do a little bit of straw poll. Presiding officer, you can say, is everyone generally in agreement that we support recommendation number 2? And get a feel for it. You can say, what's your take on whether we should remove the provisions that seem objectionable to some, and see where the majority lies. You kind of know, and you don't have to keep making a lot of motions and amending. You get a feel for where it is, then you formulate your motion, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Let's do that. Because the consensus that I'm sort of hearing is that people generally seem to be good with option 2, and I'm hearing that most of us are not liking the human rights-based amendment. So if we did move to do something like recommend option 2 without the additional amendment with the human rights exclusion, would most people be agreeable to that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and then from there, I guess we can talk about how to specifically amend the memo. But let's start with that then. Okay, so, I'll make a motion to, or I'll move to, for the fiscal commission to recommend option 2 as laid out in this memo from the subcommittee, noting that that does not include the additional amendment for the human rights-based investment inclusions.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any noes or abstentions? Okay, so that motion carries. And then do we want to do a motion to, okay, we're going to recommend that, and now we still want to present this memo to city council. So do we want to, what if we move to revise this memo by just deleting the sections about the human rights-based investment exclusion, and completing the list of companies at the end page?
Yes.
And then,
If we remove that, we don't need to complete the list.
thank you, correct, that's right. Okay, so just removing anything from the memo involving that additional amendment to human rights-based investment exclusion.
And changing the subcommittee recommendation to the fiscal commission recommendation.
Yes.
And how about the date? Is this still an August 28th memo, or is this a more recent memo now?
Let's make it a more recent memo, I would say. Okay.
It might be the February meeting.
Okay, yeah, for the February meeting. Okay, so that's a motion to change the date to the February meeting, and remove any reference to a recommendation for the additional amendment for the human rights-based investment exclusions.
I have a couple of really minor things that if we're going to revise the memo, we should consider. And I don't need a response on this, but I'm just going to throw out some things. The page numbers should be there. AUM is not defined officially. You can figure it out, but it's not defined. There's a footnote in the top of page 3, but I never found the footnote. There's a little I or 1 up there. And option 2 says greater than 51% of our investments, but option 1 is greater than 50%. Seems like we should have the same cutoff, whichever one that is.
Yeah, it should be greater than 50%, so we can make that correction.
Okay, that's all.
Can I suggest then that the motion is
Yeah,
that the subcommittee amend the memo consistent with tonight's discussion, and then we don't have to cover any of that.
That sounds
No,
good.
you'll fix the memo, we'll get it next month.
Right.
It'll be consent if everyone wants it to, and then we're done.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any noes?
Aye. I would just say no, just because I agree with the removal of the recommendation component, but I guess I disagree with not including all information that was presented, but.
Okay, so we have 1 no. So that one carries.
And we didn't vote on my suggested item on option 2.
Oh,
So does anybody have feedback on whether they think that we should make the change to exclude
aerospace defense.
aerospace defense equipment, and electronics military from our exclusion? Only, sorry, you're right, only option 1. Or to make it consistent with wording of option 2.
Sorry, can you restate that?
So in other words, I don't think we should exclude those in any option we're presenting to the council. That's my point.
The aerospace defense should not be considered. Yeah, I mean, maybe if we feel like it would be helpful, we can vote if we want to exclude that from our recommendations. Does that seem wise to everybody? Like to achieve, to give everybody a chance to state their interests or what they think is we should recommend?
So they're not excluded in the current policy
The
with the lower threshold? So the memo proposes to add those sectors? I'm just wanting clarification.
Yeah, so currently, what is excluded is greater than 51% of fossil fuels, weapons manufacturing, cigarettes, alcohol, or gambling products. So this would be an expansion that with the aerospace component, aerospace and defense specifically, just given that that was related to military contracting, controversial weapons, it's covered under that.
But it's not an option two.
It is an option.
It is also.
Yeah. But I think
Not in the same way, though. It's a much more generic wording in option two, which is easier to comprehend how we might be in favor of option two, the way that it's worded.
Maybe this is clarifying then. So the revenue screen where it says that a company that receives more than 50% of revenues from small arms, private prisons, military contracting, or controversial weapons, some of those companies would fall into electronics, military, aerospace, defense, and that's why there's a revenue-related screen there. Yeah, that's kind of the clarification that we were trying to make. But are you saying that within option two, maybe removing aerospace and defense?
No, I'm happy with option two.
Okay.
Option one,
Oh,
I
but just
think
not
we
having
should,
an option.
we shouldn't exclude those industries.
Maybe we could do a straw poll really fast to see if we were to make a motion to exclude aerospace and defense from option one in this memo, would people,
Hold on, before we make a motion though, I'm not sure why the list is different between option one and option two. Are they actually different measures based on the screen of revenue? Because option one lists these things and it, says number one, coal, number two, oil and gas, and then it's different wording in number two, and it doesn't have the same kind of numbering. So I'm wondering if they could just be the same across option one and option two, or if that's not possible for some reason about how they're being designated. This says aerospace and defense in option two. Is that number 15 and number 16 in option one just stated differently? Because for clarity, it would be easier if it was the same.
I guess I'm not sure if I understand the
So
question.
why is the list different in option one and option two? That's my question.
Okay, so option one and option two generally include the same companies. The only difference is that like oil and gas, like energy services, refiners, like there's a little bit, I guess it's like the sub-industries or sub-sectors are broken out a little bit more. Would it be helpful maybe to just get a list of all of the companies within each one, or not companies, I suppose, maybe all of the sub-sectors so that you could really compare a little bit better?
Yeah, I'm just thinking if it is actually the same list, then it should just be listed the same way and it would remove this ambiguity.
Yeah, it's a similar list, it's
But
not the
it's
same.
not the same. Okay.
Yeah, because that's why that revenue screen is kind of covering some of those like electronics, military, pricing, like explosives, because this is like if any, so it's covering similar companies, not exactly the same. I guess it would have been more helpful to have maybe a list of the subsectors.
and it also covers revenue-based exclusion, which is not part of option one.
It's not in that listing.
Right, so it is different, although there is a wide overlap, as Rick is saying.
I don't feel strongly personally about excluding 15 and 16 from option one. So I'll just put that.
I think it was 14 and 15.
14,
Right,
15,
there was
and 16.
14, 15, okay.
I
And
thought,
you
you want to exclude 14, 15,
14,
and
15,
16.
16 from option one.
how's the rest of it, just to kind of get a sense of how everybody's feeling, if we would want to vote to exclude those? Do people have opinions on that? I'm not seeing a lot of strong opinions on that. Does it seem like it would be helpful, just to make, we could address it by putting it to the commission for a vote, and we can decide, and then that'll finish our, seems like maybe the last thing we need to say. Okay, so, motion to amend the memo to strike items, from option 1, 14, 15, and 16. So, that's not, okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Sorry, I'm sorry, what is the 14, 15, 16?
So on,
It's in the,
Option 1.
in the sample policy language,
to remove these specific industries?
From option
Remove them as being unacceptable investments for the city of Davis.
I mean, I personally don't care. I mean, there's bad stuff happening at every company in every industry in this list. And, you know, the degree, what's over the line and behind, it's just so hard to say, so.
Okay, so we do have an active motion, so we already took the notes, do we want to, once
so,
again,
well, so no answer is a yes, right? But, so we're calling for a vote, so all in favor say aye.
Can you
Restate.
repeat the motion? I'm still a little confused
Yeah.
about what is on the floor that we're being asked to vote on.
would you like to?
Sure, so the motion is to strike from the sample policy language of option 1, categories 14, 15, and 16.
I do have it up on the screen, or on your monitor,
Highlighted
if
on
you
the
have your
screen,
monitors up.
On your monitor.
Open.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. And then is this anticipating a subsequent motion that the recommendation is option 1? Because if we're recommending option 2, or is option 2 everything in option 1? I'm just
It's not-
finding
it's
this
not-
The lists are
incredibly
not the
confusing.
same. That's what I've learned.
Yeah.
So it is a motion that, or it's an option that we are not recommending.
Yes, I think the commission's recommending option 2, but if we're advancing this entire memo to city council, it's still an option that they can consider with this sample policy language as something to consider. And I think Commissioner Harper is concerned that if we leave those categories in, we're excluding some like subcategories of those larger categories that we may not want to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor. Are we ready to call for a vote? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Any noes?
No.
No,
No.
We have 3 noes. Any abstentions? Okay, so, oh, sorry.
All right, put the nose, just maybe raise your hand so that Liz can get that. Thank you.
Okay, but it's still, the motion still carries. Okay. All right.
Because we had 2 abstentions.
Oh, we had 2 abstentions? I'm sorry, I missed that. Who are
Well,
you?
we only got 5 votes.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
there's, you know,
Oh, yes, I mean, sorry, not an affirmative aye is a yes.
Okay.
Yes, aye.
Oh, I didn't know that.
oh, if
Yeah.
you don't vote, that's the same as voting yes.
Correct.
Oh.
Well, you can abstain, but if you just say nothing, it's a yes.
That's the same as voting, no. So
It's,
Yeah.
if we
Oh,
could do this
sorry,
again, just to
correction,
make sure.
yes.
an abstention is, you need to record the actual vote, that'll tell you whether the motion passed or didn't pass. How many yes,
Fair.
how many no, how many abstain.
We have,
That's correct.
okay.
How
let's do
about
that.
you start again and ask?
Let's start
for
again,
hands to
okay.
be raised
Hands
instead of
raised if you're
voices.
a yes. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4 yeses. Hands raised if you're no. We have 3 no's and any abstentions?
That's 7, that's it.
Okay, good. The motion carries 4-3. Okay.
Wait, we got 8 of them.
We have an alternate.
Yeah, the alternate doesn't vote
The
unless there's
alternate?
a member.
Oh,
who's
because we
missing.
also, okay.
Okay, any further action on this item? Okay, if not, then I'm moving us on to
Before you do that,
Yes, the time, huh?
because it's past your 2 hours, a majority of the commission needs to be okay with moving on to the next item. If the majority of the commission is not okay with that, then we'll hold that item over to the next meeting.
Okay. How are you guys feeling time-wise?
I have to get up early.
Yeah, I think,
Very.
I prefer to kick it off to the next meeting.
Okay, is that a motion that we did make to?
I motion to.
Okay.
Continue the rest of the items we go out to the next meeting.
Okay, let's continue. Oh, sorry, that's a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, on favor of continuing to the next meeting, the last item, say aye.
Pushing it to the last one?
Push
Putting it to
it
the next meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any noes? Abstentions? Okay, motion carries unanimously. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting.
Leslie, can I make one very quick?
Oh, actually, we have another, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask everyone, would you like to set up an audit ad hoc subcommittee, because we're going to get 3 more audit reports this year? Would it be helpful to have a subset of us who can discuss those audits? Is that a thing you'd all like?
I think that's something we'd have to request through the city council, right? to set
So
up-
you would, but you've just decided to continue the rest of your meeting and
Oh,
not
so
go
that'll be
beyond
for the
the
next-
8:30. Sorry, Mike.
Okay.
Sorry,
In
Mike.
February,
we will
would you like to talk about doing that?
Absolutely,
So we can-
entertain your idea.
put that
at the
forward
next
as well,
meeting.
right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.
Meeting adjourned.